Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Good to see you all. Hope you can say the same thing when I'm done. Let's find out. When we talk about Muslims in America, some of the history is very clear and some of it is not. Certainly in the age of exploration in the so-called New World back then, there were sailors who were Muslims on some of the Spanish ships, for example, helping with the various explorations and settlements. While we find a few inklings here and there about Muslim immigration, the reality was the times, the means of transportation, the distance, the geography kind of negated that kind of experience for people from the parts of the world where the Islamic faith is primarily the dominant one. So when we talk about the first Muslims to America, here we have basically an unfortunate story because most of the early Muslims who came here came to us as enslaved peoples. We had approximately anywhere from at least 1, perhaps as high as 5 million people came here and were enslaved. They came mostly from the western coast of Africa, from the countries of Senegal, Mali, Guinea, Sierra Leone, as you can see, Ghana, Benin, and Nigeria. That's quite a few people, and obviously the horrors and the wrongness of enslavement of anyone, let alone that many people. Their stories are known primarily being carried from one generation to the other within the oral histories with the families. The most obvious example of this was, of course, the story of Kunta Kinte, the story of Roots, which was sort of, if you will, the personification of everyone's story of what happened. While we can't talk too much about many of these people or through only known to their family and friends, there are 3 people in particular I'd like to call your attention to. This is Yaro Manut. He was born in Guinea, and in 1752, at the age of 16, he was captured, enslaved, and brought to the United States. He would be a slave for 44 years until he was freed in 1796. And what makes his story a little bit interesting is the fact that he became very self-educated. He became a very educated man. He was also a very skilled craftsman. And his owner, his enslaver, allowed him to work at night and earn his own monies if he would satisfy the day's work he had to do for the man. And he did, and he wound up saving enough money to buy his own freedom. What's interesting about him is he took his earnings and invested it in the Columbia Bank of Maryland, which was growing and prosperous. And he was such a wise entrepreneur and investor that he was able to live the rest of his life living off the bank dividends. He built himself a house in Washington, D.C., and he lived there and died at the age of 86 in 1823. What makes it even a little more interesting is the fact that his son would move into a place in Maryland, and the place, he did so well there, the son, that the Yarrowburg is named after the family, Yarrowburg, Maryland. And the grandson wound up going to Harvard. And if you're interested in reading a little bit about, there's a book called From Slave Ship to Harvard, which tells this wonderful, wonderful story of this man who got out of the enslavement conditions and helped himself. What you're looking at now is Omar, who was captured at the age of 37 in a military conflict in Senegal, the country of Senegal. He was then and continued to be, as an enslaved person, an Islamic scholar. He would wind up writing 14 different manuscripts in Arabic. His story, his life is so interesting that you will find in Fayette, North Carolina, a mosque that is named after him. Fayetteville, yes.
Yeah, my daughter lives close to it.
Your daughter lives close to it, yeah. There was also an opera on his life called Omar. These are exceptions, maybe that's why I'm calling their attention. Let's look at our third person over here. Oh, by the way, Yarrow, that is a portrait by Charles Wilson Peale, who was a very famous 18th century portrait painter, and that man was painted as well. And over here on the end now, we're looking at Ibrahim. He's from Guinea. And he was another one who was captured in 1788. He was 26 years old when that happened. And he remained enslaved for 38 years until 1826. And his story is a little bit interesting too, because before he was enslaved, he was on a ship where he met an American dentist, and they became very good friends. And many years later, a couple of decades, the dentist happened to encounter him and was shocked that he was enslaved here in America, and started using everything in his power to get him freed. Abraham, however, was a very skillful person. He was a fine manager. The owner refused to sell him because he considered him too valuable property. Well, the dentist didn't give up. And eventually he involved the activities of the Secretary of State, Henry Clay, and the President of the United States, John Quincy Adams. And the two of them put a lot of pressure on the man who held the ownership, and he was freed. He went on a 10-month speaking tour across the nation, trying to raise money to free the rest of his family. The tour was only moderately successful, and he was only able to raise enough money to free his wife and his son, but not his other children. He wound up going on a ship back home to his native land, to Guinea. Sadly, yellow fever broke out on that ship, and Abraham would die at the age of 67, but he died in his homeland, if there was any comfort to that. Really, though, when we want to talk about Muslims making a stronger impact that we know about, obviously I'm not putting anything down on the people whose labors made the South economy boom and all of that, but if we want to see the Muslim presence being more identified, because most people didn't even realize how many enslaved Africans were Muslim in the first place. They were stripped of their identity, of their culture, of their background, of their religion, forced conversion to Christianity. We all know, I think, a little bit of that story. The 2 centuries that I'm talking about here are from about the mid-19th century on through to the present time. This is when we really begin to see a sizable Muslim population coming here. In the beginning, it was a very small scale. Turks were among them. For those of you who are Turkish here, the Turks were among the earlier immigrants, and also from Yemen, as you can see. They were a small settlement that came, but the very significant time of Muslim immigration is really in the late 19th century and into the early 20th century, mostly from, as you see, from Lebanon and from Syria. What you're looking at here is an image from the Times. This is the early 1920s in the Lower East Side. This is the corner of Washington and Rector Streets, and this is a Syrian community, an immigrant community in the lower New York section at that particular time. Then in the 20th century, it is Bosnia, but also all parts of Southeastern Europe where the immigrants start coming in greater numbers, so that by the time we get to 1920, there were at least 40,000 first-generation Muslim immigrants now living here in the United States. More than 2 million have come since 1965, so that now we are getting a much larger proportion of people coming from different parts of the world, the Muslim faith. Now, in this instance, about 72% of all Muslims, almost 3 out of 4 of all Muslims in the United States today are not immigrants. They are at least second generation. And in terms of their religious breakdown, about 73% of them are Sunni Muslims. And as you can see there, 16% Shia. What do Americans in general think of Muslims? There have been a number of polls. I will go with you with the most recent data. I'm going to be sharing with you from this point onward the most recent research we have from many different sources, from the Pew Research Center, as you see here, but we're also going to be pulling heavily from the Census Bureau and other sources as well. Here, though, the question was, what do you know of Islam? What do you know about it? More than half of all Americans, not much or nothing at all. That answer may or may not be surprising, but hidden in the answer are beliefs and attitudes and reactions. Ignorance is not necessarily bliss. Ignorance can lead to stereotypes. It can lead to preconceived notions that have nothing to do with reality. Do you personally know a Muslim? More than half, again, as you can see up there, said no, they do not. Well, what do you think of them then? Well, what are they going to think of a Muslim if they don't know one? They're going to work on whatever they're exposed to in the media or whatever they've heard. In the United States population as a whole, 3 out of 5 don't know enough to say. 1 out of 5 have an unfavorable attitude, and less than 1 out of 5 have a favorable. But as you can see here, political persuasion influences one's beliefs. As you can see here, there's a stronger unfavorable, 1 out of 3, if people have Republican or tend to be Republicans identified, whereas it's almost 1/3 less that here. But the key element that I want to stress here is the high percentage who don't know enough to say. If you don't know enough to say, you're not going to defend, you're not going to promote, you're going to be thinking silence is golden, when in reality, silence gives consent to what is being said. What do you think about the discrimination against the groups? Now, what's of course going to be here is if you're a member of the group, you're going to feel more strongly about being discriminated against than if not. Case in point, all right? Is there discrimination against Jews? Well, if you're Jewish, you think so. What you see here is people, 78% believe that there was some or a lot of discrimination against Muslims, more than 2/3 against Jews. People think there's discrimination against evangelical Christians too, 44%. And once again, if you look at the data, I hope I don't overwhelm you too much with numbers, because numbers can put you to sleep real fast. All right, we'll try not to do that. All right, but what you see here is, again,
is this actual discrimination or just
believe that there is discrimination? It's a belief that there is discrimination. Yeah, and of course not us, it's them. They're the ones discriminating. I'm just saying this there. I hope you got the sarcasm. Yeah. All right. Okay, now from going back from this, and I deliberately showed you this because this is prior to the October 7th massacre, which of course dramatically not only was a horror, but it would become an even greater horror as the years unfolded. So we go from this, which was in 2021, to now what has happened since that time. And when we look at this research, if you're Jewish, you think that the discrimination against Jews has increased. If you are a Muslim, 70% think that the discrimination has increased against Muslims, okay? If you are a Muslim, now, another big confusion, if you don't know much about Islam in the first place, which we started here, you're likely to believe that all Muslims are Arabs and all Arabs are Muslims, which of course, nothing could be farther from the truth, as you probably know, or I hope you know. There are many Christians who are Arabs. There are many Muslims who don't even live in that part of the world, let alone be Arabs. We'll come to that. But this is everybody kind of believed that it increased. 57% believed that it increased against Jews, less thought that against the Muslims or against the Arabs. So this becomes, again, an interesting perception. And again, we have to start with the base. What do you know about Islam? Do you know any Muslims personally? Do you know any Jewish people? Do you know them personally? Whatever. So there are factors that work like that. Okay. The First Amendment, freedom of speech. Here you have a study that was done at basically the same time. This is, about 5 months ago, this study was done. And what you see here is if Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, you find the very strong support among all except Muslim. When you look at Palestinians having a right to support, you see very strong support here. So it varies. This, at the end here, everybody seems to be against any kind of speech that is for violence against anybody. Most Americans will express a strong feeling about that. Their opinions will change about this, Israel existing as a Jewish state, Palestinians having their own state, and so on.
That's interesting there. 77% of Jews support Palestine.
Yes.
And 70% of Muslims support Palestine.
The point being made, I don't know if you all heard it, but the point being made that there's a very strong percentage of people supporting a Palestinian state, regardless of faith. It's not like 51, 49%. It's a rather strong case in point here. Okay. Why the negative attitudes? Here I'm speaking about negative attitudes towards Muslims that exist in our society. Why are there such attitudes? There are a number of basic reasons. Political views are a key variable. You saw that in some of the earlier slides. If you have one political ideology or orientation, you're going to be predisposed to be thinking one particular way as opposed to another. So your political views affect this. It's sort of like you see reality through your own filters. And your filters are many. It's your history, it's your background, it can be the color of your skin, it can be your religion, it can be your life's experiences, but it can also be, if some of us don't have such good eyesight, glasses help our vision. You've heard the expression of seeing the world through rose-colored glasses, people who are Pollyannish and optimistic. We see the world, we perceive the world through filters, and they can be many. And certainly political views are one, but there's something called similarity attraction bond. This goes all the way back to Aristotle, who first said it, that we like people who are most like ourselves. And that can be seen in many understandings of prejudice. If someone doesn't look like us, we immediately see something terrible. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, a lot of people came here from Central Europe, and the women were all wearing scarves on their heads. It immediately identified them as a foreigner. Today we have women who wear the hijab. It identifies, and if you have a certain filter you're looking at, it's going to affect your vision. We tend to be comfortable with people like us. I taught high school for 4 or 5 years before I became a professor, and whether it was in my high school, which was a suburban school, or in the city high school I went to, or in the college community when I was there, people grouped together. I could see lots of, the black kids with other black kids, the Hispanic kids with other Hispanic kids, and white kids with others. It's sort of, and you ask them why. It's because I just feel comfortable. And there's the key. What makes you feel comfortable with someone like that and not someone like this? Okay? And it brings us all back to this concept of similarity attraction. And what we're talking about here isn't so much yet the prejudice. That could be there. It could be the foundation, but it could be something else, can't it? It can be just simply, I would have some of my students do research, and you teach them you have to do random research, like every third person or every fourth person to make it truly random. You don't go up to someone because you think they'll answer you. That one person looks a little scary, so I won't go there. We do make judgments just on this. I mean, if you're walking down a lonely, deserted street and you see someone coming toward you and that person's wearing a suit and a tie, you might be a little more comfortable approaching that stranger than if that person is sort of like with a cigarette dangling from the mouth, walking like, little bit of a John Wayne walk. Who's going to scare you more? There are perceptions we do. We do categorical knowing. If we're unfamiliar, if we're being fed misinformation, disinformation on social media or whatever, these are real problems. It leads to stereotyping. Because if I don't know, I can generalize. We go back to all kinds of jokes, hillbilly jokes, blonde jokes, all kinds of Rufus jokes or whatever. They're there. Why? They're based on a stereotype, and the humor helps prolong it. We also make assumptions. If you look different, then you're not only don't you look like me, but you probably don't think like me. And you probably don't believe like I do. And so if you are someone who's religious, religion can be wonderful, isn't it? I mean, there's so many good things about religion. It gives us purpose in life. It gives us meaning. It helps us through the hard times, the solace and so forth. There's so many wonderful things about religion. But it can also be the source of prejudice. If you believe you are the chosen, you are the one true faith, you are the true believer, whatever it is, what are those other people? What are them? Kill the infidel. It can be all kinds of ways in which you make assumptions. George Bernard Shaw once said, there is only one religion in this world, but there are more than 100 variations of it. And when we think about it, there's a lot there that if we could only absorb it, right? Also, something unknown, something foreign can generate fear. When it comes to Islam or Muslims in America, there's a fear of terrorism because terrorism is real in this world. There are radicals out there. Well, let's get into that. Let's do a little bit of a deep dive here. What are your odds of being killed in the United States by a terrorist? This has been studied. How did they do the study? They look at what's happened, who did it, and what is it vis-a-vis the people. And what do we find? 97%. This is the Cato Institute, by the way. 1 in 3 billion chance of you being killed by a foreign-born terrorist. However, the odds drop of being killed by a US-born terrorist from 1.3 billion to 1 in 28 billion. Let's put that even a little bit differently. Look at this. White supremacists have killed 9 times more Americans than any Muslim extremist has. I want to pause for a moment about extremists. There was a time when there were Irish extremists, and they were called the Molly Maguires. And they killed and they bombed. They were a terror, fighting for what they thought was right, but it smeared all the Irish. About 30 years later, what you have is the Haymarket bombing in Chicago. Some anarchists blew up and killed some police, and suddenly anarchism and foreigner were linked together as one and the same. You wind up getting Italian gangsters, the mafia. Suddenly, if you're a successful Italian businessman, it must be because you're connected with mafia. The acts of a few smear the entire group. That's the reality. Okay, what I'd like to spend most of my time with you today, though, is to look at this whole idea of what are Muslim Americans like today. Now, there are so many kinds of Muslims, and so it's very little, kind of difficult to pinpoint or be accurate. Because you can't stereotype, these are the Muslims. You just can't do that. So let me share with you what I can in this particular regard. Muslims at the moment are the third largest religious group. The official numbers are 3.5 million. Many people think that's an underestimate, but that is what the thinking is. But looking at migration, looking at birth rates, the demographers can project into the future, and they are saying that by the year 2040, Muslims should be the second largest religious group in this country. Who are the Muslims? Of the Muslims born in the United States, to start there, about 60% are Black Americans. That's of the US born Muslims. The other figure that's here that might start confusing us is basically 1 out of every 4 Black Americans today is a Muslim. Of all the US Muslims that are immigrants, 70% are citizens of the United States. They have become citizens. I'll break that down more fully later. Black Americans, Arabs, and South Asians are more than 2/3 of all the Muslims in the United States today. Let me show you that a little differently, perhaps, to make it a little more easy. I have pictures taken, so okay, here we go. Fastest growing, South Asians. Pie chart might help a little bit more. So we can see here that 38% are white, 26% Black, 30% Asian, 4% Hispanic, 2% others. Well, that's kind of a convenient category until you say, well, wait a minute, Asian? Asia is a pretty large continent. It includes way over there, Japan and Korea over in the east, and go down into the southeast. We're going to be looking at Indonesia and some of the places like that. We come over a little bit to central. We're going to look at Muslims who are in India. And if we go a little further west to what is Western Asia, that some people call the Middle East, we have all the Arabic peoples. And so it gets kind of too big a catch-all category here.
I have a question. This
Sir?
says 38% of Muslims in this country are white?
White Muslims, yes. Now, here's where we get, the question is being asked, 38% of Muslims are white. Here we get the confusion between race and ethnicity. All right, this has long been a confusion with Hispanics, but it's also confusion here. Because if you are from Jordan, let us say, do you say, I'm an Asian? You probably would declare yourself as white. So what we will have is people, especially from West Asia or the Middle East, identifying as white. self-identifying, and that's how you get the number that high. This pie chart breaks it down a little better for you. Because now what you're seeing is this is back to that 37% of US Muslims. But now what we have over here is what is conveniently referred to as MENA, Middle East, Northern Africa. All right, and so what we have is nearly 30% of all Muslims in the United States are from the Middle East and from Northern Africa, okay? This is the South Central Asian and Sub-Saharan Africa, okay? European, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan, Southeast Asian, and other. So that helps us a little bit more, seeing that now we're beginning to see a clearer picture of how complex it is when you say Muslims in America. They are many peoples all over the world. All right, what states do you think have the most Muslims?
New Jersey.
California.
I'm going to give you first the fourth tier. These are states with large Muslim populations, but less than 300,000. Where do you think they are? Here we go. Michigan,
Really?
Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts.
Michigan.
All right. Now, keep in mind, we are talking Muslims. We're not talking nationality, because there are many Arabs living in Dearborn. I'll come back to Dearborn again, in Michigan, that are not Muslims, but are Arabic. So again, we have to try to cut through all the work here. All right. So, okay, if those are, where do we go next? Well, there happen to be a couple of states that have more people than this, but less than 500,000, less than 500,000. And this is New Jersey, Illinois, and Texas. That's our third tier. So a very large Muslim population, but less than 500,000. What state have I left out?
California.
Oh, California. Okay. California has far more than 500,000 people in it. And so that is the second largest state with a Muslim population. Who's missing?
Florida.
Not Florida.
Minnesota.
New York. New York has more than 700,000 people of the Islamic persuasion. Or if you don't like if you don't like colored maps, maybe you like numbers better. Here are the numbers. This is what they are. So 724,000, New York, California, as you said, a little bit of Illinois, then New Jersey with 321,000. This is 2024, by the way, the most recent data we have. Okay. Michigan, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. So those are the numbers. What's interesting, if you are living in one of these states, it isn't so much the numbers that you are aware of, it's how many people you see. So what we do is to get a handle on your reaction to the presence of people who are Muslims in we look at not numbers, we look at per capita. And if you remember, with the states being what they were here, who's number one and who's down below, these are the numbers. But if we change it and say, okay, how many Muslims per capita, per person there, it changes the whole image. Because now what you get is Illinois has nearly 4% of its population are Muslims. So there are more people per capita in Illinois than in any other state, okay? New York still will hang in there up high, but you can see now it changes quite a bit, because you also have New Jersey is purple as well. So it's New Jersey and Illinois are the states, maybe not the highest in the numbers, but per person, per the total population of the state, in relation to it, there are far more Muslims per capita in New Jersey and in Illinois than elsewhere. So that's, again, it's a perception issue, but it's also a reality issue. What cities? Los Angeles is down there. New York City heads the list at more than 75,000, and you can see the numbers there for yourselves with Houston, Philadelphia, Paterson, New Jersey, right in the middle there, ranking 4th in the number of people. And you know that. Those of you who are from this area, you know this very well, that Paterson is known for its large Muslim population. But there it is in comparison to some of the much bigger cities, which is another interesting. Paterson is about 153,000 people. We're talking about a city in New York, it's approaching 9 million. There's a big difference in the numbers, but there is, compared to those other places, little old Paterson.
But both of those, Paterson and New York City, have always been the home of new immigrants.
There is also a strong, you're right, there's a strong pattern of migration. Where is a favorite destination of immigrants? Where do they go? And it's always been that this area, the New York metropolitan area, is a magnet, if you will, for people pursuing the American dream. No question about it. Okay. I mentioned citizenship earlier. Now we're going to break it down a little bit. Afghans, Egyptians, Iranians, Pakistanis, Syrians, Turks. So among the total population, there are about 14% of people who are foreign born, either as non-citizens or citizens. The Afghans are refugees primarily. They are here more recently than others. So you have far less of them are native born, let alone naturalized citizens. So what you basically have is half of them are not even citizens, 28% naturalized. So basically you have more than 3 out of 4 of all Afghans are foreign born. When we start looking at some of the others, there's certain things going on here for varying reasons. Some have come later than others. With the 1980s problems in Iran, for example, you had many Iranian middle class coming here at an earlier time than others. But what you can see here is a fairly interesting consistency. 71% of all people with Turkish ancestry are citizens. It's higher among Syrians. The Syrians have come in great numbers back in the early 20th century. So now we're up at 83%, 87% for the Iranians, and so on, as you see here. And when it comes to those who are not citizens, there's a reasonably close little going here. I was surprised at this number, that 3 out of 10 Turks are not citizens at all, which suggests quite a bit of influx in recent years, and we know that, of course, because of the conditions in that country, being forced out or being imprisoned. All right. How about educational level?
I don't see data for African Americans or Africans. In that only depicted parts.
Yes.
You talked about the black population of Muslims in the country earlier, but this seems skewed if it's not included in this.
Well, what we're talking about here primarily now are the immigrants.
Okay.
And very recently, we have been getting African immigrants from Kenya in particular, but also Nigeria and some of the other countries there. The problem right now is most of them are so new that they're not yet registering on the citizenship types data. So they're excluded from this particular thing. That's the only reason for it. It's the data pools. And so staying with those groups though, pursuit of the American dream. One is immigrants come here for a better life for their children, for better educational attainment. And so what you see here is very high with Egyptians and Iranians, as you can see, and Turks as well, at least a high school education. And look how profound it is here with college degree or higher, 72% here, compared to the U.S. population as a whole, which is 36%. So we do have a great many highly educated immigrants coming to us from certain parts of the world who happen to be Muslim. Again, not everybody from these countries is a Muslim, of course. There are Coptic Christians, for example. There's 20,000 or whatever in Jersey City, and so on. So this doesn't mean it's just Muslim, but it is we know that there's a large percentage of people who are Muslims coming from these countries. The Census Bureau does not break down religion. And so you cannot get census data from that. All you can do is interpolate by what percentage of Catholics or Jews or Muslims are in a particular country, take the data, take a percentage of it, combine it against the other percentages. Is basically the only way you can kind of do it, but it's guesstimating based on reliable data, but you will not get it directly from the Census Bureau.
Excuse me. If you go back to the previous figure, the total population of the U.S. or the last column, or total population of the
90% of the American people have a high school education, at least, and 36% have at least a college or more. What language is spoken at home? Before I put it up, let's use a little common sense. If you're a member of an immigrant family, the language you speak at home is going to be probably that of the homeland. This has been true since immigration began. There was a time, for example, in New York State, Dutch was the language, the everyday language. There was only one American president who spoke with an accent. Now you have to be born in the United States to be president, but there was one president of the United States who spoke with a very heavy accent and was mocked by his enemies, his critics for it. Any idea? I actually gave a hint just a moment ago. It's Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren grew up in a very Dutch community in New York State where not only was it the everyday language, but in his autobiography, he brags that his father was Dutch, married a Dutch woman. His son married Dutch, and his grandson married Dutch. He was so proud that they were still all Dutch. So you can expect that in Italian and in a Polish home, the language would be that. And that's what you see here. So once again, among the more recent arrivals, like the Afghanis, a language other than English is being spoken by 87%. But what you have here is even among more recent arrivals, it's extremely interesting. Again, we're looking at countries which have a large contingent of immigrants, and we have people in each of these ethnic groups that do not speak English very well. And you know what your home is, what's spoken there if you're in an immigrant family. And generally what happens is English is not an easy language to learn. So immigrants have a hard time with it. The children have a facility in the brain development to be able to learn another language very quickly. And so the children are usually bilingual, help their parents out with any of the language problems or whatever. And the odds of the third generation speaking that homeland language drop to less than 1 in 5. They really do. Children grow up, identify with the country they grow up in, not the country their parents came from. And that's part of the Americanization and assimilation that goes on. But here's the current data that we have. 2023 is the most recent data. Nothing for 2024 has been released yet. It's too new in the year to do that. Where are they working? What kind of distribution is going on here? So in the so-called white-collar jobs, which are primarily the top 3, although service is a little bit more encompassing, you can see the breakdown here. Again, the Afghanis are the most recent, so you see a lot less here, more in blue-collar working at production, transportation, and moving, if not this is in the natural resources, which means farming and fishing and that sort of thing, construction and maintenance. So here you see the breakdown, and there's some comparable things. Management, business, science, and the arts, the more elite of the white-collar occupations, if you will. You can see 2 out of 3 here, more than half, 58%, 60%, compared to, again, and this is tied in, as you can expect, with education. We saw the educational levels just a moment ago. It obviously corresponds to the occupations that people are in. So there is the breakdown of many of the ethnic Muslims in our country today and the occupations they're in. Poverty. Many people who come here are poor. Many people already born here are poor. Poverty is a reality. And again, I'm just emphasizing right now this. I do have other presentations and data in which I do this by race and ethnicity. I don't have that here, and I apologize for any oversight on that, but I do have it, and would be happy to share it with you. If you want me to send you some material on this, I'd be happy to. Just give me an email address or something. Anyway, dealing with it. Again, the newness. So this is families as a whole living in poverty, and 9% of the American people as a whole, but that goes higher into double figures for Black Americans, for example, higher double figures for Hispanics as well. And so this is the Census Bureau gives us by families as a whole and for individuals living in poverty. And there's a little bit of a consistency there, and there's not much in terms of being an immigrant Muslim and that being a problem from some and not others, unless you're a more recent arrival. Okay, so let me bring my talk to a close by talking about the continuing patterns that we find for all immigrants, but most especially the topic for today. We have first, what are the push-pull factors? Why would you give up on the land that you are familiar with? Why would you leave behind your friends, your family, your custom, your language? You're pushed, either because it's persecution and repression, it's economic hard times, it's warfare, whatever. If you want to understand the history in the early 20th century of the migration of Blacks from the South, you look at these push factors and the pull factor. Why do you go? It's not just where do you leave, where do you go? Where do you go? There are many reasons why you go there. There's allure, opportunity, freedom, economics. Why in more recent years are more Black people in America, American Blacks, moving from the north to the south? The pattern has reversed for about more than a decade now. There is a new pattern going on. We look at the Sun Belt. We look where the jobs are going. Where is the economy booming? Where are the factories opening up and so forth? We begin to get some of the answers. And when we start looking at why do we have so many Muslim immigrants now and we didn't have them before, you have to look at what is causing people to give up on all that you know and go to a land you may know only by hearsay, maybe because of a television show or a movie or something on the internet, or what is making you go there. And then you usually go to a specific place, perhaps because of what we call chain migration, the link. You got someone you knew from your village. You have a family member. Something connects you in some way. Maybe it's work. I had a young man in my class a number of years back. He was a Circassian. And they fled from some part of Turkey into Lebanon and settled in the Golan Heights. When war broke out there, the family came and settled in Patterson. And I asked him, I said, checking out for the chain migration, which I always do, why did your family settle in Patterson? Did you have any family here? He says, we had no family here. Did you have any friends here? No, we had no friends. We knew nobody. Well, then why did you come to Patterson? We heard there were other Circassians here. We heard they were here. And wanted to tap into the community. If you're going to go somewhere, you are a stranger in a strange land, But if you can have some little social capital in some way, you're going to go for it, right? And so when we start looking at those of you who, you can answer your own family history question here, whether you're an African American, why are you living in New Jersey? Where did the family originally go from? You know, are you was it North Carolina? Was it West Virginia? Where is it? Whatever. And when I used to do this with my students, all that, it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. Somebody has to be the first, of course, but then there's this link of some sort going on there, which brings us to a wonderful concept called ethnogenesis. Now, if you don't know this word, folks, this is the word for today, all right? Mm-hmm. And you have to use the word 3 times before you go to bed tonight, okay? And you can't just say ethnogenesis, ethnogenesis. You know, you have to use it in a sentence. And the sentence can't be a question, do you know what ethnogenesis is? No. You have to use it as if you know it, and you will in a moment, if you don't already. Okay, you can see the words hidden in there, ethnic genesis, you know, you can see it hidden there. But ethnogenesis is this wonderful process that all immigrants go through, whether you're the African rural resident coming to the urban north, perhaps, or whether you're coming from Africa or from Asia or Middle East, Europe, it doesn't matter. It happens to everybody. What happens? Well, it's sort of illustrated maybe with this circle. 2 interlocking circles. If you are an immigrant, you are a product of a culture with your values, your attitudes, your beliefs, and you're attempting to put down roots in a new country, starting over. What you have to do, if you're going to survive, is you have to adapt. You have to learn at least some of the basics. You have to adapt. And so what you do is you adopt some of the new culture and its behaviors and its language. But then you maybe adapt some of yours to fit in here with it, all right? So it's kind of a blending, it's a merging. So these 2 cultures, the one you're from, the one you're in, and they start coming together. And if you're a first-generation immigrant, the circle never closes. You are a product of who you are, maybe because you came here over the age of 8 or 10 and you've never lost your accent. Young kids always lose it. But it's more than an accent. It's a part of who you are, what you are. Your sense of self as a person was formed in another place. You may be older, you may be more experienced, you may have become more cosmopolitan, but you're still that person. The child is growing up in a new culture, the other circle. But the child is in a house being raised by adults with other beliefs, values. This is where we not only get a generation gap, we get an ethnic generation gap. And sometimes it's kind of hard. It's clashes. So many stories, so many studies of every people that you can ever imagine, from the Vietnamese, from the Hmong, everybody. There's a blend. And so what's happening, and you can be your own family historian again, is looking at, were you, or was it your parents, was it your grandparents who moved from the South up here? What are the stories there? Or if you are an immigrant family or whatever, the stories are all there about this changing, this blending, this identity. And so what do you identify with? It depends on your age and what you say you are. I, for example, am a 3rd-generation American. I'm what Hitler used to call a mongrel. I'm a little of this, a little of that. He used to call Americans mongrels because we all blended together. It's kind of interesting, though, because, and this is what I'll close with, when we describe ourselves, or when we are described by others, we call ourselves, I'm Jamaican American, you know, I'm Iranian American, I'm an Irish American, or whatever we are. What we are, though, is the common denominator American. You know, the old motto of our country, you know, e pluribus unum, from the many, one, we are one. I must tell you, I have been on dozens and dozens of assignments with the State Department overseas. And when I deal with Europeans or parliamentarians, it isn't, you know, I remember saying to one, and he was the president of the Senate of Romania, and I mentioned to him that he was a Hungarian American, and he was very offended. He was born in Romania. His parents were from Hungary. He was very offended I call him a Hungarian American. Try that again. A Hungarian Romanian. I am Romanian. No, I'm Hungarian. I am a Hungarian. And because it is here you become, there you were and are and remain, and it doesn't matter what you are. And that's not just one person. I count it everywhere. All right, it's a mindset. That's a mindset. Why is it that so many Muslims and Jews get along so well in this country? There is a temple in Patterson. Its congregation moved out. It is now a mosque. Islamic Center. It's a mosque. It's interesting what happens. And so what we're talking about here then is, okay, I gave you numbers, I gave you figures, I gave you breakdowns, I gave you all that. But there's a dynamic that's more understanding than anything else. What we are and what we are becoming is far more important than what we were. We hold on to our roots, we treasure them, we honor them, but the essence in a country that is an immigrant receiving nation is the dream living each generation, the circles coming together, not the walls. Thank you.